true to what you said on paper.
I wish that I could freely dream and be judged from within, hunted by a power that...
Well, speaking of power, good morning and welcome to At the Round Table with Mel. I'm your host, Larry Olson. In studio, my brother from another, Dr. Bradley, is in here. We're giving you a checkup from the neck up.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, you know what I'm noticing? I noticed that when I walked out of the house this morning, I was like, ooh, it's kind of nippy. You know?
But did you also notice there was one other person left in the house after yesterday?
Yeah.
I want to say congratulations.
Has the notice come out yet?
No, it hasn't, but I want to say congratulations to your lovely wife and bride.
Thank you.
She is now in the retired box.
Yeah, she's in the retired box. We drove down to Boston. I think it was on Monday, and we went to City Hall, which I found that to be really amazing because all these buildings. I'm like, where all this stuff coming from? So I got lost. To be honest with you, and she filed her intent to retire. Okay, and we had to go to BPD, and she gave her paperwork over to personnel, and said, well, you know, I see you. So she went in yesterday just to say bye to the
they had a little something
folks.
for her.
Yeah, they had a little thing for her, which I was not invited. I was kind of like, I had little things to do. But her last day is on the 9th, where she go turn all her equipment in, and then we go off into the sunlight.
Well, listen, it's a beautiful thing, right? You're already experiencing it. I'm looking forward to it.
34 years, man.
Cool. That's
34 years.
Yeah, this job takes your youth. You give it. Yeah. I was 19 when I came on.
Wow.
And I had hair.
She was 20. In fact, her mother had to sign for her to go to the range so she could fight the fire off. Because she was not old enough to discharge.
Wow. But also, what was interesting to you talk about that is that her situation was like mine. I was doing details, and I was the one that was in charge of making sure everything was safe, and I couldn't even have a drink because the legal drinking age is 21.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So I was like, what's wrong with this picture, right? I am the one who everyone is looking at if something happens. Yep. This 20-year-old at the time, I turned 20, and yet I can't come in here and have a drink.
She had the same thing. So we're happy, and she's happy, and we're planning on where we're going for her celebration trip.
Okay.
And but I'm limited because I'm teaching, so it's kind of hard for me to get away.
So you can't do the remote as much as more. Are you still doing a lot of remote?
Well, it depends on which area you're teaching in. If you're doing traditional, the school will require students to be in the classroom. If you're doing CE with continuous ed, then the school gives it a little
flexibility. To a lot of people working, so actually probably the
remote
works.
Yeah, I usually do remote. What we call synchronous when I'm doing the lecture online.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty cool.
All right. Well, we want to thank our sponsor, Guarantee Rate Mortgage Company. For all your mortgage needs, give good branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0252. Guaranteed Mortgage is located at 75 State Street in downtown Boston, Mass. Guarantee Rate Mortgage Company, guaranteed to exceed your expectations.
Yeah, that's good.
So, folks, if you want to give us a call here, the caller number is 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685 is the calling number. But before we go any further, Pastor Hobbs, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Doing the honors, Pastor, since you do it so well.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys are kind. God be the glory. It's authentic. That's all it is. Father God, we do bless you. We thank you for this day that you made, and we do choose to rejoice and be glad. And we're so grateful for the opportunity to be on the air on this. Well, thank you for the Manly broadcast. Bless this broadcast. Bless our community. Bless all that's said and done. And we'll be careful to give you the praise, give you the glory, to give you the honor. We count this as done. In the matchless name of your son, Jesus.
Amen.
Amen.
So, we're going to have a guest calling and two guests calling in our 8 o'clock hour from the SOS, not the old SOS band. SOS, it's a new group that was formed because of the violence that's continuing in our schools, in and out of our schools, involving our young people. It's called Save Our Schools. And Dave Surlis, who is the founder and a named person you're going to be familiar with, who is part of that group, who is retired, and former Boston Police Detective Renee Callender.
Is
going to be.
She and I used to work together in District 11.
And she works with them, and she also has a nonprofit that she has started. That
I noticed that on LinkedIn.
Yes, and so they're going to be calling in the 8 o'clock hour to talk about that, and there's a lot to talk about because I was just learning from Pastor Hobbs. I didn't get a chance to see it, but there was a vote by the citizens in Boston to have an elected school committee. And the mayor, the city council, which shocked. The only thing I think they ever voted unanimously on was their pay raises, and then they did it for the second time recently. Was unanimously that we should have an elected school committee. I think they're reading the wave of pilks out there. The community wants to have a say in who is leading the charge for their kids, and the mayor rejected it. She vetoed it. So I don't know how people don't take note of that. The people are speaking, and they're saying that if you look at realistically, since it's been mayoral, strong city school committee, we've seen a decline. The Menino started under Mayor Menino. He got it. And folks haven't had any say, and we've seen a dramatic decline in school. So I don't see what the harm would be in having people accountable. In fact, all our other elected officials that are leaders are accountable, and they have to face the voters every 2 or 4 years. And the school committee should be no different. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more leading up to our 8 o'clock guest.
I have one question. Is the school committee a paid position?
I'm not sure. I believe they get a stipend when they meet.
Okay.
Because
I'm
it's not
just curious. Some school committees, it's not. It's just community service.
That's a great question. I want to do a little research on that because I think that when they were there, I'm not sure if it was a full time because they meet the budget and they have the meetings, but we'll research that. Great questions there. So. But before we go any further, I want to say a hearty good morning to Mr. and Mrs. Harry Scales, avid listeners there. Rhodes Pierre, who was one of our Mr. Ditka is usually out there listening to us as well.
Advertiser.
Oh,
you did it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, he was telling him to turn down the volume. I was turning it up.
Oh, okay, I got you.
No, but I appreciate you.
Okay, I want to make sure that you take care of us.
Absolutely. You don't want to go with that air, right?
Yeah. Want to make sure we take care of us. We take care of us.
No, absolutely. We got Cora taken care of.
Okay.
I try to get them out of the way.
Okay. All right. I hear you. Good. I'm glad.
No, that's the first thing. But thank you. See, our brother's on top of on this job. So. Also I want to say good morning to Brother Jamal Crawford there, always out there. I have a lot of laughs with Jamal.
Well, Jamal gave me a gem, man.
Oh, the book? I read that. Yeah,
I'm in the process. I'm reading 3 books.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I have to read. That's how my mind works. And that one's now the 3rd one.
Okay.
And so I went through it, and I kind of skim it first, and I go into details. There's some. I wish historically the guy would have spoken to me, but listen, it's good. It's good reading, and I think every person of color should read this book.
Well, not only that, would you say that it should be part of the curriculum for
absolutely
police officers coming out?
Absolutely,
I would agree.
Absolutely, that's the first thing I thought about is why. In fact, I wanted to take it to Norris and look at this.
Right.
You might want to look at this.
Yeah, I know he said he had gotten one from Superintendent Basson.
Yeah,
Basson, who is now the head of the police
academy, right?
Yeah,
this is something that that should be on their schedule for reading.
Yeah,
should be required reading.
Right.
That there should be testing. And there should be write a paper on this. That's how I would do it because it has some historical facts about policing and how policing was actually designed for slave patrol.
No.
That's the event that happened that actually caused it. That I would have said to the author, maybe you want to think about this, but other than that, it is absolutely on target.
Yeah, and
Thank you, Jamal.
I would be remiss if we didn't cash in on our frequent flyer miles.
Oh, to Indiana, to Gary.
Gary,
back to Indiana.
I'll let you sing it. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish. Go ahead.
No, brother, I'm just.
Can you hum a few bars?
No, man, that's an aberration, but No, you don't want me to do that, brother.
No. Listen, come on. You were doing good there, man. You were getting in the groove there. Come on, Pastor. I know you got to come on. A little shout out.
I probably, if I do that, brother, I'll probably end up getting arrested for public disturbance.
Oh my goodness,
disturbing the peace.
Come on, all right, come on now.
Peaceful Airways of Boston, man. No, brother. No, I just say good morning, Mr. Bridgeport.
You're not gonna sing him a lullaby.
No, I'm not, man. You know what I mean? I'll lip sync.
You see, folks, I just come here for the entertainment. There's no cash residual. There's no cash value for this.
Oh, man.
They'll never get you for infringement copyright.
No, they won't, man. No.
Brother Bridgeport says good morning as
the
well.
Brother doesn't have it.
Listen, he wants you to sing him another bar. He says,
brother.
I see it right there.
No, brother, you have to acknowledge your limitations, man.
What's that? That was, I think, a Clint Eastwood movie when he said, a man has to know his limitations.
And that is mine, dog.
That's yours.
Yeah.
You also. So, like I said, our guests come in at the 8 o'clock hour time school. So, I want to really lead it off a little bit there.
Yeah, the school, the conditions of the Boston public school system is sad because we all know that it can be better.
Yeah.
We have gone through the Boston public school system, and I full disclosure, I did not graduate from the Boston public school high school, but I did attend Boston public schools in the grade school and middle school.
Yeah.
And I didn't turn out too badly, to be honest with you. So we can do better. Well, why aren't we? That would be my question.
So I want to get your take on this because you served as the director of climate and safety. Is that
public safety and security?
Safety and security in Randolph schools.
Public schools, yeah.
So basically, you were the chief law enforcement person for the safety of the schools district in Randolph,
yes,
right? And you served in that position
for 7 years.
Right. So you understand the value, right? So is it fair to say that not providing a safe learning environment is conducive to not learning?
Absolutely.
You said
absolutely. I have had kids come to me, on the, as the kids would say, on the down low, and say, "Listen, I don't want people to know that I'm talking to you, but." This particular individual is causing a problem in this particular classroom, and it's aggravating because I got to do better in math.
Yeah.
And I can't do it
because
the teachers don't have time to teach me because he's dealing with this particular individual.
So you almost anticipate my question because what you just said was what I was going to say is that participation, that conversation you had with those students was based on not them just walking the first day. It took a minute for them to build that trust up.
Oh, yeah,
with you,
absolutely.
Right? And that's what has eroded, right, with the way things are structured now, where you don't have, for instance, eliminating the school police in the Boston public schools, who were law enforcement, who had police powers, who no longer had that. And because they had that power, they had to cooperate with law enforcement in a way that was meaningful.
Well, I think it's served on two ends of your argument, Larry. On the first piece, it demystified policing because a lot of the students that when I first got introduced to the Randolph Public School community, I was introduced as a retired deputy superintendent of Boston, a retired Boston police officer. So the students knew that I was a police officer.
Right.
They knew that, and they understood, that this guy is coming from that world. But when I actually started to talk to them and met them where they were, and some of it was on the basketball court. I used to be a baller, when I was in high school. I was able to shake and bake, but now I'll probably shake and break. But it's cool. It's good. Yeah. So I was able to actually go to the gym when they were out there doing the pickup games, and and I was giving them advice on this and that, and we develop a bond.
Right.
And so these kids were not reluctant to come to my office and talk to me.
Well, in the kids' language, you had built up some street cred.
Yeah, I did.
Right.
Yeah.
Your resume, right? But but also your compassion comes through, your humanity comes through, your life experience of being a husband and a father, right? So you saw these young people as children that could be yours.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you cared for, and you can't fool kids. They know.
Oh, they know who's caring, who's not.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Or when you're just there because you have to get paid, right? to be there, right? And as soon as the bell goes off at the end of the day, you don't want anything to do with them. So they're very observant. And what we've seen now is that kids are basically kind of being left to fend for themselves, to make decisions. And we're seeing an escalation in violence in and out of the schools that I have not seen in quite some time. And in my opinion, there is a direct correlation of not having this presence, this deterrent. That's because that's really what it was in the schools. So I want to read this piece here from this week's edition of the Bay State Banner, written by Yahweh Miller, good friend of both of us. This is a drumbeat calls for cops in school. The mayor and a majority of city councils polled by progressive groups during the 2021 election expressed opposition to placing police officers in Boston's public schools, a position those city council members say none has backed down from. So when 4 of their council colleagues signed a letter in January calling for uniformed police officers and metal detectors in middle and high schools, a policy change still seemed a remote possibility. The city in 2021 removed uniformed officers from school buildings, replacing them with Boston Public Schools police officers who do not carry weapons or have arrest powers. Yet the pressure for police presence in the schools has ratcheted up in the last month. The newspaper, the South Boston Today, a Boston Herald columnist, and online journal Catholicism.org all have repeated a key piece of misinformation in a letter by at-large Councilor Aaron Murphy, stating that there were 744 sexual assaults in BPS schools during the 2021-22 school year, and an alarmingly high number that would represent more than 4 assaults per day. In truth, there were 7 students disciplined for sexual assault behaviors that range from unwanted touching to forced penetration. The 744 statistic referred to instances of sexual misconduct, a broad array of behaviors that can include students telling sexual jokes, commenting on each other's bodies, or sharing nude photographs. Last week, a Globe opinion writer cited incidents this year in and around BPS schools, a brawl near the Tech Boston Academy in which 3 students were stabbed, and 2 incidents in which middle school students were disciplined for carrying knives, and arguing for the city to take a fresh look at metal detectors and school police. In the group safety of our schools, SOS, who's going to be our guest, a coalition that includes the Ella J. Baker House Project Right, the Central Assembly Church of God in East Boston, and Promoting Conflict Resolutions, which is our other guest, Renee Callender's organization, coming on 8 o'clock, cites rising crime rates among teens, calling for metal detectors and police in all middle and high schools. We are calling on Mayor Wu and Boston school leadership to listen to the voices of parents who are alarmed about the increased levels of youth violence in Boston schools, the parents who are grieving because their child was brutally assaulted in school, and the parents who simply want their child to be educated in a safe school, read a press release on the group's website. So, and it goes on, we'll get into it, but it speaks to what we were just talking about prior to me even looking at this, is that people are saying if there is not a safe environment, the learning will not take place.
Yeah, well, I know that for a fact. It's not going to take place because we, as human beings, must feel safe before we try to improve ourselves. We have to feel that, there's a environment on which we can feel comfortable to absorb, to review and absorb this new knowledge. And we have to also understand that these are kids. Their brains are just beginning to develop. So some of the behaviors that I hear you put on the table around the sexual assault and the penetration, when I'm saying to myself that, well, that's rape, to me is not, I wouldn't say common, but I would say that the brain has not developed. There need to be adult guidance in this area. And that a lot of that rests with the home, by the way. And that's what I found when I was actually the director of climate and safety in Randolph, is I had to bring the authority within the home, the parents, to my office or meet them where I could, and I was not opposed to saying, okay, where are you? I come to you. Because this child's life and this child is about to be introduced to the criminal justice system, and I have no control over it because the law says we have to do this. But I would like to get you involved. I'd like to get your opinion, get your participation, how we can resolve this issue without going to the next level.
Right. So, but Dr. Bradley, what does that say when, just unpacking what you just put out there, the fact that this behavior exhibited, and some would say, well, it's a learned behavior, right? That a child that young doesn't know what the behavior that they're exhibiting isn't something that just forms in your mind. Right?
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I would say to that individual, be careful, because our kids are exposed to more information than we have ever been exposed to when we were kids. All right, when we had to actually, we were boys. We were all young
we used to
girls,
try to find the Sears catalog.
Exactly.
And remember the Ebony Jet, the centerfold. That's the only thing I read in it.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Playboy. I mean, whatever we could do. I mean, because we were curious about it. Well, today it's on your phone.
Right.
Today,
it wasn't as easily accessible.
It's easily
right?
accessible.
Right.
And so you have to control that. And then you have to, as the child gets older, you have to talk to that individual. Now, there were some kids, I don't want to use a broad brush here. There were some kids who were well organized in their work, well behaved, but you can tell that those kids had most of the times they had multiple parents. What I mean by that, they had grandparents and parents who were actually overseeing their development, or they would have a very vigilant, for lack of a better term, one parent who actually were very actively involved in their lives. Yeah. But the ones who had multiple parents and both parents are doing their own thing, or young, doing their own thing, those kids were just left out to pasture to kind of grow and do whatever they wanted to do.
To your point, when you said about grandparents, I'm seeing grandparents now who are in their 30s. Right? Yeah, that was so that means that they had this child in their teens, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so that learning process for trying to teach and learn at the same time is probably a difficult feat, right? Because I think it's fair to say that if you were trying to get your PhD, which you now have, being a dad, trying to change diapers and all that would have probably been almost impossible, right? Trying to split that. But when you had completed that task, would it be fair to say that it was a lot easier for you to focus on that when your kids are grown and they can take care of themselves? And
absolutely.
Right. But
absolutely.
I guess my point is that at 15, do you think that you were prepared to be a father?
I wasn't prepared to be a teenager. No mind being a father. No mind being a father, but no, I really wasn't. And oftentimes you don't have the support systems in place to do what fathers need to do and work and do the things, and to also make sure that your child is coming up correctly. So we have our system, and when I mean our system, I mean the public policies that we have promulgated over the years have been designed to destroy the family, in particular the family of color, by removing people out of the home, especially around arresting and mass incarceration and three strikes type of nonsense. But my point is that when you do that, you destroy the very basic of society, which is your family. And this is the manifestation, what we see in the school of that.
So I want to go back to something you just said, because it's like, how do we put the genie back in the bottle? I don't think we can. And like you said, what young people are exposed to, because we see, for full disclosure, folks who don't know, I work in the schools for the Boston Police Department. And that's the other myth, that the Boston Police are not in schools. Let me repeat that for folks who are out there dispelling that. The Boston Police branch of the Boston Police, we are Boston police officers who are assigned to the schools, and we are assigned there to provide safety in that environment. But we do not patrol the halls in any school, and we do not have a presence in any school other than our office is located in a building, which is an administrative building of the school department, right? But we have there are no kids walking past, so we don't see the kids. So that false myth that we've removed the Boston Police from the schools is not true, because no matter what happens, you will have to have law enforcement to investigate these things, whether you call us the school police or just the Boston Police, right? We have Boston Police who work in the schools. Right. If you cut that work in the schools, we still respond to calls. Officers in the area still respond to calls. So my point with the social media is that the social media drives a lot of the violence, the anger, the constant grind of in your face. Kids fighting, it's no different today. Let me back up. It's been since the beginning of time. Kids had disputes in school and they had fights. The difference, Dr. Bradley, was that if you and I had a fight growing up, even if we lived on the same street, there was a cooling off period. Because at some point, right, we would go in the house. I didn't have access to the phone. You didn't have access to the phone. Phone was in the kitchen and in your parents' bedroom, right? That's where the two phone lines were,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Pastor Hobbs is not in agreement, right? Because we all right. So you didn't touch that phone.
No.
You didn't even know most of the time. You didn't even know your friend's number because you couldn't use the phone. So it served no purpose to you. So these kids, we had a cool. Even if we were angry the next day, I probably forgot about it, or we had cooled down. Now it's the constant, the TikTok and the Facebook, and now you invite other people to engage in it, right? So even you've got this device in your bedroom. You just most of these kids have phones. That is that constant communication, that back and forth. There is no time to decompress from it. And I tell parents all the time, it violates that conversation your parents had when you. What's one of the first things your parents told you growing up?
My parents told me a lot of things.
But one of the things is what this is. Don't talk to strangers.
The first thing my parents said to me, number one, I was thinking by the time the light come on, boy, you better be in the house.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Anybody approach you, you should let me know about it.
Right.
But I have a lot of thoughts on that, Larry. I'm over 60, so I want to make sure I get this out.
Okay.
The problem we have today is that...
And I'll write you a prescription.
Okay, thank you. The problem we have today is that the violence is allowed to perpetuate by this particular thing that we call the phone. Now, let me explain this to you. If you get into a fight when we were kids...
But let me just say, see, this is not just this is a computer.
Yes, it is.
Right, so go ahead. It's not right.
So when we get into a fight when we were kids, you have to fight.
Yeah.
The kids who are around you, they know about who won or who lost or who if it was a draw. And there's no level of embarrassment. It doesn't extend beyond those kids, or it doesn't go very far. But today... it's recorded, it's on TikTok.
Right.
The whole world knows. And so now you get this level of embarrassment. And now it becomes, I got to retaliate.
Right.
Because I got to make sure that this individual. So what you have, this is just a perpetual, review of information that actually continuing the fight, as opposed to us when we say, okay, this was stupid.
Well,
you know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. But like I said, parents say, well, it's just a phone. And I say to them, okay, I grew up with a phone. My phone, the phone you could only call, right? It was. Listen, you had arrived when your house, and you guys are gonna laugh when I say this. When your home, when you first got call waiting, right? When you could accept another call and have that call waiting for you, right? Call waiting and voicemail. That was. You can't do any of that with a phone, right? Your house phone, you could not do the things that you can do with this.
Yeah.
Right?
But oftentimes when we develop technology, we don't think about the social implications.
There you go.
Like a computer. A computer in your home, when we put those in, there was social implications associated with that computer. Just like a refrigerator. When they actually finally figure out how to freeze the food, there were social implications associated with that. Every time we make advance in society, we have to think about the social implications. And unfortunately, some people did, because this doesn't cause the problem in all schools,
right,
like Latin. So we know that it can be done. Now, what is Latin doing to prevent this from being a problem? Because kids are kids. In Latin, they are kids, or in Boston English, they are kids. You know what I mean? So what are the policies and practices that are in place in Latin that's not in these other schools?
Well, I think part of that, to your point, is that those schools are exam schools, right? And so you show an ability and a willingness to want to learn, right? It should not be the exception; it should be the norm. That type of learning.
But let me push back on that, though, because I think the desire to learn is in all schools. However, what I think is that what's happening is that there's a lack of parent involvement at different levels in all schools, and that is a major piece to what's happening to the problem.
Again, I like where you're going with this, because to your point, it's just like when most parents that are early on that have gotten their kids into the medical system, right? it shows a willingness on their parents that they value the education, they see it as a priority, and they're realistic about their children's possibilities of learning in a Boston public school system, right? That they need to. So the fact that you have to get your child up at the crack of dawn to get them on a bus to travel outside when there's a school probably a stone's throw away from them, but you know that is not going to prepare them, right? Because I tell people, and your point is well taken, is that if I know that and I'm looking at this, and that's why it's been very difficult to attract people. Like Boston now has sent out for lateral transfers for become police officers here in Boston. And the response has been lackluster, to say the least. I think
why would I do that?
Right. From my all the reporting, is less than 10 people have applied, right? And they were looking for around 50. I've talked to some of these people, and there were several stumbling blocks. Was that if they didn't already live in Boston, to buy a home in Boston, the cost is prohibited. But the biggest driving factor, if they had children, is that where am I going to educate my children? Am I going to put them in a system that I know is not serving the kids that are already in it? How's it going to be any different from mine? So that means that I'm going to have to then add the added expense of private school, right? But if I'm already in a town as a police officer and I'm in a good school system, why would I disrupt that to come to Boston?
And you, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? I wouldn't.
What's the benefit?
There's no benefit. You know what I mean? But I think that the town goes where the school goes. The school really usually dictates the quality of people that are moving into the town. Because I wouldn't move into a Boston public school, into a Boston, knowing that I have to send my kids to the school system. But my kids I was fortunate enough to send them to private schools. You know, not all folks have that level, of fortune. And so we have a real serious problem here. But I think this is all calculated. I think that's just how I think about it. I think it's all calculated. I think it's a part of the whole plan, the grand plan. You know, to move, to change the demographics, if you will, of the city of Boston. Because I think the potential, the know-how, the willingness, and the resources to have a good school system, they're all there. They're just they're actually corralled until certain people move on, and then it's going to be released.
617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. You're listening to At the Round Table with Family. I'm your host, Larry Ellison, in studio with my brother from another. The doctor is in the house. Dr. Bradley is in the house. Give me a checkup from the neck up.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Just a point of clarity. I actually pulled up the article. It actually was not unanimous.
Oh, it was not unanimous. Okay.
It was council members passed the legislation 7-5.
But it passed.
It did pass.
Okay.
It did pass. So yeah, it wasn't unanimous, but nonetheless.
Who were the 5 that voted against? Does it say?
It does. Boston City Council, in a split vote, approved Wednesday afternoon a proposal to switch back to an elected school committee 3 decades after mayors were put in charge of appointing a district school board. Director Michelle Moo, who reiterated her opposition to the change. It was Brian Worrell. So supporters of the change plan to continue the pressure to the mayor to take action. City Council Ricardo Arroyo was opposed. This is right. Opposed
to having an elected school committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Who supported the bill? Councilor Julie Mejia said he hoped a sufficiently overwhelming vote would help convince Wu to send the petition to the legislature, but the council's lukewarm approval of the measure, that seems unlikely. Let me read a little further. I did read it. It was,
So basically, this is an election year, and our elected officials are saying they're not. The city. This is an election year for the city council, and they're saying that they're not listening to the voters who have voted them in.
Correct.
And then in the same ballot, they voted to have an elected school committee, and they're saying that, well, we hired you, you work for us, and you're telling us that what you want doesn't matter. In these times, it's not like things are going well And I think someone says that's the definition of insanity, Dr. Bradley and Pastor Hobbs, doing the same thing, expecting a different result. Because, matter of fact, last weekend, along with the unfortunate reporting of the 16-year-old to have alleged to have stabbed and murdered a 20-year-old and stabbed another young lady, and they had to run into the police station there, was that the state recent observations of the lack of improvement in the Boston public schools, it's more likely that the state is going to take stronger action and stronger involvement in trying to move them, because the numbers aren't moving up. This also is not a money problem. Last week, as we reported out, the budget is over $1.3 billion and close to one, and they're asking for a $68 million increase for FYI 2024.
Where's the money going?
What would bring it to $1.4 billion? Yeah. But the other piece to that, Dr. Bradley, you reported out, is that the populate it went from 75,000 to down. We're hovering around 47,000 students in the Boston public school system. So we're asking for more money. We're not seeing a real improvement for the investment.
But in all fairness to the Boston public school systems, if a lot of that money had been siphoned out to charter schools,
a portion
that will be, see, that would be that, that need for the increase. But even with that, you still have a lot of money out there, and you're getting a very poor return on your investment. If I were an individual living in the city, I'm paying into the tax coffers. I'm like, okay, what is the return on my investment? A child shooting a child in school, a child beating up a child in the bathroom. We got to do better than that, folks.
But then why oppose having an elected school committee when we've seen that having just one person, i.e. the mayor, deciding this has not worked? Since Boston is the only school district in the Commonwealth, folks, that doesn't have an elected school committee.
And so the question would become, if I were actually looking at analyzing this, I would ask the question, how does Boston stack up against other school districts who do not have an elected committee?
Well,
how does Boston stack up?
I think it's self-explanatory, and for the most part, right? What other schools around the state do you hear about on a regular basis?
None.
That's
my point.
Okay,
that's my point.
Right. So, are they getting it all wrong, or is Boston getting it right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, am I hearing that because Boston is really as bad as it is? I'm hearing that because news outlets don't see the value of reporting that. Is there something really happening? Because I can't see that, there's any school district, any school building where there's not some type of immaturity displayed around behavior, because kids are immature.
Right.
You're going to have that level, but how bad is it? That would be the degree
and to your point, Worcester is would probably come the closest that I can think of as far as population with students that would match. Boston is a lot, so it's not fair to match that up with other smaller school districts.
So Worcester and Springfield might be another one.
Right. Okay. And so when you look, but even if some of those have had a learning gap, they don't have the violence that it's not being reported.
That's my point. And so what is the behavior reports in those particular school districts who have elected school committee as opposed to the ones who do not, as in Boston? And when you do that comparison,
it's glaring, because again, there's accountability in that arena, right? Yeah. And Randolph has an elected school committee.
Yes, it does. As which I was actually asked to run. My wife was like, "No, that's not going to happen." But it does have an elected school committee, and you have some dynamics in that paradigm as well. There's no question about that. But what tends to happen is that whenever that individual was going up for election, that person has to show, this is the work that I have done to promote fair, equitable, and safe education in the schools.
But also to that point, Dr. Bradley, that the elected school committee person is appointed by the people, and they're accountable to the people, and they have to come up before the people, as you said, and stand on their merit. The feeling, and in a lot of ways it's true, that the appointed school committee person does not work for the people. They work for the mayor. They are an employee of the mayor. In that people see, I've been to these hearings, and it's a foregone conclusion that it's a formality when you have these conversations. But if the mayor has already pointed out what they want, that's what's most likely to happen because
and that what happens when you have indirect versus direct reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So the elected school committee, report directly to the people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the elected school committee have to show them, the merit, what they have done to actually improve the conditions in the school.
Mm-hmm.
So when the parents are coming and they're speaking, there's some bite behind that conversation, Doc, because that parent is a voter. You see what I'm saying? But if you actually have a situation where the mayor, all right, is appointing the school committee members, then the school committee member is indirectly reporting to the parent, and the mayor is the person who has direct report. So the mayor is the individual who says, "This is where I want you to go.
Right.
That's where you're going."
And
period.
And
so the parent doesn't really have much to say on that when the
parent
goes
they have no
to
say.
when they go to the board, go to the poll to vote. That school committee member name is not going to show up.
That's right.
The mayor's name is going to show up.
That's right. But they're not holding them accountable. The mayor stated the city, if she said anything, it was very little as regards to the schools.
Yeah.
Right? And so this gives you cover to try to control the narrative.
I think the other way around that, though, is to go directly to your state rep.
Well, but from my understanding is that they have to be sent over the request.
I understand that
from the home.
Right. You're right. But if you go to your state rep and say, "Hey, listen, this is what people have said," then the state rep would be more apt to actually go to the mayor and say, where are you going with this?"
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm just wondering in this climate where the state is having such an involvement because of a lack of improvement in learning, is there an avenue for people to say to the state right now, maybe it might be better. Do they have the opportunity if the state takes it over in receivership and the state says, okay, you know what, part of this reforming is to have an elected school committee at which the voters have said, because we've seen the decline since we were moved away from it.
I think you're onto something. I think that would probably end up happening. But I also say to myself that the state is not in the business of running schools. I mean, it doesn't.
And I don't think they want to be. But I think it says a lot about what hasn't been taking place when they have to even come in
and
right?
do it. Yeah.
Because you're right. They're not equipped. They don't have an infrastructure, and they have
especially a school district as big as Boston.
No,
they're not really encouraged to do something like that.
We've seen this happen in Rhode Island, where the state came in and had to take over the schools, and we see, how in fact, because it also impacts when people are looking to move to a place. A lot of folks look at, well, what's the school?
Well, that's the first thing I would ask if it really wouldn't. Well, actually, it would still bother me as a resident because I'm paying into a dysfunctional system.
Right.
But the first thing I would ask the question was, what is the quality of schools?
But see, in Boston, unlike Rhode Island, right, where people are making a lot more. So if you can afford a $1 million home in Boston, you most likely can afford to send your kid to private
Absolutely.
school. So it's not as much of a problem as it is in some areas where if you live in a neighborhood and you're renting, it's unlikely that you can send your kid to private school. Yeah. So we see who is affected by this, right?
Yeah, it's always support, but the other side of it, Larry, is that we have to give, in all fairness to the school administrator, you can't write laws and policies that is going to hamstring or tie the risk of the school administrator when it's time to deal with this most recalcitrant child.
Yeah.
So you have a child who's very difficult to manage and won't listen to anyone you say, and you have to take that child and put that child back into the learning environment where he or she's only disrupting the learning environment.
Right. How do you put them in a learning environment if it's not even a safe environment, Doctor?
Well, exactly. Or they're contributing to the lack of safety in the building.
Right.
So that was my huge frustration. It's like, okay, every child has a right to an education, but no one child has a right to prevent other childs from learning.
Exactly.
It just doesn't happen. But what do you do when the school administrators say, well, what can I do with this child? And the state says, well, you got to keep him.
Right.
All right. You can't take him out of the school.
Right.
What I said was, okay, let's do a type of some type of program within the school where the most difficult kids would be in the school, so we can kind of urge them, teach them how to behave, teach them how to actually resolve this situation other than violence, and then thereby creating an environment where they can actually start to learn and become accomplished, and then maybe that would put them on the right track.
Well, my vote is Dr. Bradley for superintendent of Boston Public Schools.
Ain't happening.
Good morning.
So that's the problem.
Good morning, caller. No, you talking sense, and that seems to be a nonsensible conversation taking place. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the roundtable.
Good morning, and Leo.
Good morning.
I definitely have to agree with everything that you gentlemen have said so far. My personal experience is like when I went to the Boston public school system, like my parents appreciated the Boston school system, but they didn't put trust enough in it where it was like I went there for a year and after that they sent me to private school. So they didn't like what they were seeing. But to point out the fact that, you know, the education system should be the flagship or should be our crowning jewel, like 'cause the investment in our future. And I don't know why Boston, again, like the fact that like you said that the school committee or the school board is appointed by the mayor, and I think that's too much power.
Well, exactly. We've seen that, and power. it doesn't work when it's just one sided, and that these folks, because I think a lot of times, you know, they're less willing to point out the deficiencies for the worrying about losing their job. But the other piece to this that doesn't get enough conversation, gentlemen, is that Boston gives all of our college institutions, and particularly our larger ones, the BUs, the Harvards, the Northeasterns, the Wentworths, MIT, these they get a huge tax break. Boston is not in some rural town where the closest university is hundreds of miles away. They're stone throws away. So there should be a support system in lieu of the tax breaks that they get from the city to help to boost up the education here. We should not be lacking in an education support when we have the people come from all over the world, not just the country, all over the world to partake in the education system here in Boston, and yet our kids are failing. Is it a coincidence that because that close to 90% of the kids in the Boston public schools are black and brown?
I think that is. I think that's one of the things I meant when I said the resources are corralled and they will be released when the demographic shifts. That's what I meant, you know, because there's, you know, you have more colleges in a 35-mile radius in the city of Boston than you have anywhere else in the country. You know, and those colleges are, you know, you have people who are well educated, who are who are experts in their field of education, EDs. If you got schools issuing doctorate degrees in education, where the people are thinking about how do you actually tackle these problems, and have written dissertations on them. Yet we have done very little to bring those individuals in and benefit from that knowledge. And so my question would be why? You know, why are we not tapping into that resource?
A great question. And Rhodes, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Not only, it should not be arbitrary. It should be a demand that, okay, what have you been doing, Northeastern, to help with the education here in the city of Boston, right?
Invest in the community.
Right.
Like
So,
you're okay. You're in the community. Just be part, invest in the community.
Right.
I can tell you what they have done. They have purchased all the buildings
Exactly.
in South End.
Right.
They have rezoned the South End.
That's right.
From Roxbury to South End and changed the entire footprint in that area.
Exactly. That's my
what they
point.
have done.
And guess what? They've gotten tax incentives and tax breaks for doing so, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, if the mayor is calling herself progressive, that's what she should be challenging. Those institutions and making them come up. When she's talking about affordable housing, well, that's a big part of this as well. You have an education gap here. You have a problem with learning here in the city of Boston. Why are we not forcing institutions that we know that we supplement their income, right? And we ask for very little, if nothing, from them. Not ask, but demand, right?
And I think I think the undercurrent for this issue, the underflow current for this issue is justification. That's really it. And that's how I see it. And unless someone can actually package it better than I and give me a better argument, because I think justification, when I look at it, tells me this is a rationale for all this. That's why I say it's calculated, because we can do it. We have done it. We're doing it every day. We call it Latin and O'Brien Academy. That's what we call it.
Right.
We see it. You know what I mean? So, and people are actually crawling over each other to get into those schools. Well, what are they doing? So I think that the city can do it. The city has the resources. The city has the connections. The city has the pool of educators throughout the city, and we at the collegiate level to get it done. But they have not chosen to do so because the demographic shift has not occurred yet that they want yet.
So, Rhodes, what would be your recommendations to the Mayor Wu as relates to this elected school committee, which now is appointed by the mayor? And I know she said for her somewhat of a compromise would be a hybrid in which she gets to appoint, but that's not what the citizens have said. They don't want a hybrid. They want people who are all accountable to the elected body, not to the mayor, but to the citizens of Boston. They get to hire them and they get to fire them.
Hey, this is supposed to be a representative government, so the people have spoken, represent what the people have expressed, power to the people. So this is what they want, this is what you should do. It's not about what you want, it's about what the people want. You were sent to represent the people, not to tell the people what to do. They're supposed to be, government by the people, for, of the people.
Right. Well, I mean, the mayor, is saying that she's quoted in here saying, Iran not being for a fully elected school committee, and this moment is also one where we need to have focus on stabilizing getting our school facilities up to date. Well, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. You can have the nicest building, but if there's no learning going on there, all you have.
Say that again, Larry.
What?
Read that again. I did what?
She says, Iran not being for a fully elected school committee, and this moment also is one where we need to have focus on stabilizing getting our school facilities up to date and mental health supports and some of the academic changes. You see the deflection there, right? From what the people want. This is what you ran on, but you also ran on putting deputy superintendents back in charge of the district stations, and now you're backing away from that.
Yeah,
so it tells me you have flexibility when it's
telling me the union is also actively involved in saying we're not going to vote for you the next time around if you do this. That's what it's saying to me. It's also saying to me that she's saying, I told you I wasn't going to do it when I elected, so the people who voted for me realized that I was not going to do this. All right, and I'm in the seat anyway. And so, but now I'm going to focus on actually cleaning the pen, but I'm going to put the pits back into a clean
But to that
pit.
point, the same people that voted
sense to me.
for her voted for other things, and one of the other things they voted for was an elected school committee. So they said, yeah, we'll take you on, but also it doesn't mean that you get to veto our vote for an elected school committee.
Yeah, but the thing is that see, it sounds like to me she put in the cart before the horse. You're going to clean the building, but you're not going to deal with the attitudes.
Update, right?
So you're going to update it, and I'm not against that.
No,
I'm not. I think that's necessary. I think a clean environment is conducive to learning as well. But if you still have the same issues in the old environment and you put them in another environment, well, you still got the problem.
You put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig, right? You can have the most beautiful building, because if you look at some of these suburban schools that were run down, they hadn't had a new building, right? There was learning going on there. It wasn't the building that was extracting knowledge. It was what was taking place in there. So the structure might look good on the outside, but if there's no learning going on, even like the Dearborn School, it's a new school. It's a turnaround school. It's been for the last 10 years. It's a brand new state-of-the-art building, but it's a turnaround school. So that means that we've got to get things turned around here. There's not so the structure doesn't dictate whether or not learning is going to go on in there. Latin Academy, Latin School is probably one of the oldest buildings in the city. Schools, right? It's not a state-of-the-art building. It's had some improvements, some additions added on, but the bulk of that building is as old as can be.
Yeah, it's one of the first schools.
But what is still as old as can be is the learning that's taking place in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so
the vote. City Council President Ed Flynn and members Frank Baker, Mike Flaherty, Aaron Murphy, and Brian Worrell voted against it.
An elected school committee.
Yes, and Kenzie Bach voted present.
Okay.
But
He didn't vote.
nonetheless,
He didn't vote at all
right,
on the issue. He just said I'm here.
correct.
Yeah, I'll take his place. So that's interesting. That I would have thought that Mejia and those folks would have sided with the mayor, because that's pretty much where they've been on these social issues.
So I'm hearing the Irish folks are voting against it.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
That's
It's a
what I-
block.
that's what I heard. Yeah, it's a block.
They vote
Yeah.
pretty much consistently, and that's this kind of tension that's happening at City Hall. Interesting enough, to your point about Mejia, it was actually apparently Ricardo Arroyo, and who I guess initiated this, and he said Arroyo said once again on her desk, that's where the rubber stamp hits the road. So Mejia supported this, and what's his name, Arroyo. So City Council Arroyo, who sponsored the bill, and City Councilor Mejia said she supported.
So Arroyo sponsored the bill to have an elected school committee.
Supporters of the change plan to continue the pressure to the mayor to take action. City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, who supported the bill with Councilor Julio Mejia, said he hoped a sufficiently overwhelming vote would help convince Wu to send the petition to the legislature. But the council's lukewarm approval of the measure seems that unlikely.
Well, that's interesting, because I know Arroyo, Wu supported Arroyo in the for the DA's race, and that he's breaking with her. But I mean, and rightfully so in this instance. I mean, you know, this is not about politics. This is about reality, and this is about accountability. And if you want it, just like you want it in a mayor, you want it in your elected officials, people should have a right, because no one in the public other than the mayor can fire the school committee if they're not doing a good job. That's where the accountability comes in. I know we're short on time here. We got to run. Thank you, Roach. Hey, continue to listen. We have folks in from the SOS going to be, Save Our Schools are going to be in at 8 o'clock hour. So you definitely want to call back in and weigh in on that, sir. Did we lose Rhodes? All right. All right, we're going to take our break, and we'll be right back.
This is for the dreamers. They say I am a dreamer, 'cause I still believe that anything is possible as long as you work hard.
Hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle real hard, hustle
So
real
if I
hard.
never see ya, never get the chance to meet ya, no, I came up from the bottom, always